The mirrored building of Haverstone Corp gleamed under the sun that Monday morning. The lobby was bustling, filled with employees in impeccable suits, high heels clicking on the marble floor, and cell phones glued to their hands. Among them, almost invisible to most eyes, walked Mariana, the secretary who worked on the 14th floor. She wore simple, discreet clothes, always carrying a calm and polite demeanor, but behind that humble appearance hid an observant mind, attentive to every detail. That morning, an important meeting was about to take place. The CEO, Alvaro Haverstone, a middle-aged man with neatly slicked-back gray hair and a smile that resembled more a mask of arrogance, was preparing for a gathering with the company's directors and investors. The main boardroom looked more like an arena, glass walls with a panoramic view of the city, a massive oak table, and leather chairs that looked like thrones. Mariana was there to perform her role: serve coffee, organize documents, take notes. It wasn't her responsibility to take part in anything beyond that. But since she had started working at the company, she knew Alvaro enjoyed using public moments to humiliate those he deemed inferior. And she, a mere secretary, was his favorite target. As soon as Mariana entered carrying a tray of coffee, the loud laughter of her boss echoed through the room. "Look at this," Alvaro said, tapping the table lightly, as if someone like her could ever understand what we're discussing here. "Mariana, tell us, do you think you could make this quarter's profit projection?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Some executives looked away, others smirked discreetly, accomplices to the cruelty. Mariana kept her calm expression, though her heart raced. "No, sir," she replied in a low but steady voice. "That's not my job." Alvaro stood up and, with an air of superiority, raised his hands as if performing a show. "Of course not. You could never do it. Never. Not even if you had a lifetime to learn." His laughter filled the room, followed by muffled chuckles from those present. Mariana simply tilted her head slightly and returned to her duties, but something burned inside her. It wasn't the first time she had been exposed like that. She had already been mocked for her humble background, for studying at night in a community college, and even for her reserved demeanor. But that morning, something inside her awoke. As she served coffee and organized the papers, she listened to every word spoken in that meeting. Alvaro spoke of numbers, goals, and strategies, as if he were a maestro dictating everyone's destiny. But Mariana noticed the gaps, the contradictions, the weak points no one dared to question. In that moment, she didn't know exactly how, but she felt that one day she would have the chance to show everyone, including her boss, that she wasn't the useless person he made her out to be. And, ironically, that chance would come much sooner than she could have imagined. Mariana was born in a humble neighborhood of São Bernardo, the daughter of a bricklayer and a seamstress. Her childhood was marked by hardships, but also by solid values: respect, dignity, and the certainty that education was the only path to a better life. As a teenager, she watched her father fall ill and her mother work endless hours to support the household. It was during this time that Mariana learned the hard way not to complain about life and to fight with whatever resources she had. While many of her classmates gave up on school to take low-paying jobs, Mariana decided to do things differently. She worked in bakeries, supermarkets, and even as a caregiver for the elderly, always saving part of her salary to pay for her night classes in business administration. She had no luxuries, no time for parties, but she had determination. It was during one of those late walks to university that she first saw the imposing structure of Haverstone Corp, one of the most powerful companies in the country. Imported cars drove into the garage, uniformed security guards stood at attention, and the mirrored windows gleamed against the city lights. Everything seemed untouchable, unreachable. Mariana made a promise to herself. One day she would work there, even if it was in the simplest position. Fate didn't take long to place her inside that glass tower. At 23, after sending countless resumes and failing several interviews, she finally landed a job as a junior secretary. It was a modest role, but for her, it was the beginning of a journey. That's when she met Alvaro Haverstone, the man at the top, a leader whose presence dominated any room, charismatic with investors but cruel to his employees. Coming from a wealthy, traditional family, Alvaro believed that power was synonymous with humiliating those beneath him. Mariana noticed this within her first few weeks. The boss never missed an opportunity to ridicule his subordinates, especially those from humble backgrounds. He called drivers ignorant, mocked the way security guards spoke, and treated secretaries as if they were invisible, or worse, as props for his cruel jokes. Mariana soon became one of his favorite targets. Her simplicity stood in stark contrast to the luxury of the company. While other secretaries carried designer handbags and wore brand-name clothes, she wore outfits stitched by her mother. While some lunched at fancy restaurants, she brought homemade meals in a small container. And, for some reason, this only fueled Alvaro's disdain. "You'll never be more than this, Mariana," he would say, in a tone that sounded almost paternal, but dripped with venom. "The most you can hope for is to keep serving coffee." Those words echoed in her mind, but Mariana never reacted. She observed. She stored everything away. She learned. Among her colleagues, some pitied her, while others laughed along with the boss to avoid becoming his next target. Mariana, however, never played the victim. She knew that every humiliation was fuel. What no one knew, not even Alvaro, was that Mariana was studying business administration with a focus on finance. Every laugh he had at her expense was, in truth, one more reason for her to dive deeper into numbers, reports, and the mechanisms that kept that massive corporation running. The years passed, and Mariana became a silent, yet crucial piece of the puzzle. She was the one who organized meeting minutes, who reviewed spreadsheets before handing them over to the boss, who had access to schedules and sensitive information. Invisible to most, she knew every detail of the Haverstone Corp machinery. On the other side stood Alvaro, growing more arrogant by the day, more detached from reality. To him, Mariana would always be the poor secretary. He never imagined that, in silence, she was accumulating enough knowledge to destabilize his empire. And life, with its peculiar irony, was preparing the perfect stage for it. Because behind the shining facade of Haverstone Corp, there were cracks. Cracks only someone as attentive as Mariana could see. The following years transformed Mariana into a mature woman, with a firm posture and a sharp gaze. Despite her simplicity, she never stopped studying. She graduated in business administration, completed a postgraduate degree in finance, and, in silence, accumulated knowledge that very few inside the company possessed. The curious detail was that no one, except herself, knew it. To everyone else, she was still just the humble secretary, discreet, the girl with the lunchbox. Alvaro, on the other hand, kept reigning. The millionaire boss flaunted cars, international trips, lavish parties, and a lifestyle that bordered on extravagance. Yet his arrogance grew in the same proportion as his inability to notice the cracks around him. He was blind, intoxicated by his own power. It was in this scenario that Mariana began to notice the first signs of fragility within the corporation. Disorganized spreadsheets, risky contracts, unsecured investments, small mistakes Alvaro ignored, but which Mariana, with her meticulous vision, knew could turn into a catastrophe. During meetings, while the boss delivered pompous speeches to impress investors, she wrote everything down. She observed. She compared the real numbers with the empty promises. And more, she was certain. The empire of Haverstone Corp wasn't as solid as it seemed. Mariana also began noticing the movements of characters who could become key pieces in the turning point of her life. One of them was Gustavo, a young lawyer on the legal team, recently hired, but ambitious enough to see opportunities in every detail. Unlike his colleagues, he respected Mariana, often asking for her opinion on documents before presenting them to the boss. Another was Helena, an investigative journalist looking for evidence of irregularities within Haverstone Corp. Mariana met Helena by chance in a cafe near the company. The encounter seemed casual, but over time, Mariana realized there was far more behind that coincidence than she initially thought. And there was also her greatest ally of all, Alvaro himself. Without realizing it, he handed her valuable information during conversations, laughed at serious problems, ignored warnings, and boasted that he knew more than everyone else. One afternoon, in a heated meeting, Alvaro slammed his hand on the table and shouted in front of investors, "Who here dares to say I don't have control over everything? This company is my castle, and no one will ever bring it down." Mariana, sitting quietly in a corner, simply observed. And at that moment, something ignited inside her. The certainty that the castle had hollow walls. It only needed the right push to collapse. Her life had been marked by daily humiliations. "You'll never achieve anything," the boss used to say. "You'll never be more than a secretary." But now, Mariana knew something he would never suspect. She held the pieces of a puzzle capable of turning the game. And, as if destiny itself conspired in her favor, the first real opportunity arose. A document left behind on Alvaro's desk, a poorly drafted contract filled with dangerous clauses, fell into Mariana's hands. Not by accident, but because he, in his arrogance, believed that someone like her would never be able to understand it. But Mariana understood, and she realized she was holding a ticking time bomb. The game had begun. After that meeting where Alvaro boasted in front of the investors, Mariana went home with her heart racing. Inside her bag, she discreetly carried a copy of the contract he had left on the table. It was like holding dynamite, a document full of obscure clauses that could ruin the company if exposed. That night, Mariana sat at the small kitchen table, lit only by the dim glow of a yellow lamp. She spread the papers across the surface, took notes, and turned on her old laptop, where she secretly organized everything into spreadsheets. There, like a true strategist, she began mapping out every fragility of Haverstone Corp. She knew she couldn't act impulsively. If she confronted Alvaro head-on, she would be crushed. He had money, lawyers, and influence. But Mariana had something far more valuable: knowledge and patience. Her plan began to take shape in 3 stages: observe and collect evidence, no direct confrontations. Her first step was to keep playing the role of the obedient secretary, invisible to her arrogant boss, while gathering documents, records, and information that proved the company's misconduct. Build strategic allies. Gustavo, the young lawyer, would be a key piece. Unknowingly, he was already helping Mariana by explaining legal terms and validating her suspicions. The journalist, Helena, on the other hand, could turn documents into devastating headlines. But Mariana needed to be certain both were trustworthy. Wait for the right moment. She knew Alvaro's arrogance would be his downfall. All it would take was one occasion where he underestimated everyone, and she could pull the rug from under him. The following days were marked by silence and discipline. Mariana listened to conversations in the hallways, organized folders, memorized passwords carelessly left open on computers, all without drawing attention. Meanwhile, she maintained the image of the naive secretary. She responded humbly to every harsh command, pretended not to understand certain jokes, accepted unfair criticism with a discreet smile. To everyone, she remained just the submissive employee. But at night, at home, Mariana transformed. She analyzed contracts, studied financial statements, cross-referenced information with old reports. She uncovered shell companies, overpriced contracts, and even bribes disguised as international transactions. Each discovery was stored in a folder with a simple name: Plan B. And once again, destiny collaborated. Alvaro, increasingly overconfident, began planning a risky merger with a foreign multinational. A billion-dollar deal that could either solidify his image as a magnate or, if poorly handled, completely destroy his reputation. Mariana knew this would be the final battlefield. To prepare, she began testing her allies. She left small hints for Gustavo and watched his reaction. The lawyer not only noticed them but reinforced her suspicions, once murmuring, "Mariana, if this contract falls into the wrong hands, the company could face an unprecedented scandal." She just smiled, saying nothing. With Helena, she was even more calculated. In a casual conversation, she remarked how Haverstone seemed too big to care about details. Helena, intrigued, tried to probe further, but Mariana remained vague, leaving the journalist restless and eager for answers. Everything was ready. The house of cards was built, and Mariana knew all it would take was the right breath at the right moment to bring down not only the walls, but also Alvaro's impenetrable ego. The day of the big merger announcement had finally arrived. The Haverstone Corp conference room was filled with investors, lawyers, invited journalists, and executives. The glass walls reflected the grandeur of the event, and at the center, a long table gleamed under the bright light of modern chandeliers. Alvaro, dressed in his flawless Italian suit, walked as if he owned not only the company but the world itself. He wore a self-assured smile, the kind that sparked admiration in some and disdain in others. At his side, the directors exchanged nervous greetings, well aware that any mistake that day could cost millions. Mariana, as always, was there, discreet and quiet. She took notes, organized papers, poured coffee. To everyone, she was just the efficient secretary, invisible to arrogant eyes. But inside her chest, her heart raced. She knew this was the stage for the confrontation she had awaited for so long. When the meeting began, Alvaro opened with his usual arrogant tone. "Gentlemen, we are about to seal the greatest deal in Haverstone's history, a merger that will place us at the top of the corporate world." The audience offered polite applause, but Mariana noticed the uneasy glances. Many already suspected the fragility of the contract, and that was precisely where her final move would come in. While Alvaro displayed charts and promises, Mariana discreetly slid an envelope to Gustavo, the young lawyer. He opened it carefully, and his eyes widened. Inside were undeniable proofs of fraud in the company's financial statements. Documents signed by Alvaro himself, hiding billions in debt behind a facade of success. Tense, Gustavo raised his hand. "Excuse me, Alvaro. Before we move forward, I think we need to discuss something." Alvaro frowned, irritated. He hated being interrupted, especially in front of so many people. "What is it, boy?" He sneered with contempt. "If it's a legal detail, we'll deal with it later." But Gustavo didn't back down. He raised the papers and said firmly, "These documents show serious inconsistencies, hidden debts, inflated contracts. If this merger goes through based on these numbers, everyone here will be implicated in fraud." A heavy silence filled the room. Journalists began whispering. Cameras turned toward the table, and Alvaro's face turned pale. "This is absurd," he shouted, trying to keep control. "Where did you get that?" It was then that Mariana stood up, stepping into the center of the room for the first time. Her voice, calm yet steady, cut through the air. "From your own office, where you left these papers lying around as if they were trash. For years, you treated me as invisible, incapable. But it was precisely that which allowed me to see what no one else did." All eyes turned to her. Mariana, the secretary always ignored, was now the central piece of the story. Alvaro, furious, slammed his hand on the table. "You're nothing but an employee. You have no right to interfere in Haverstone's business." But Mariana didn't back down. She pulled a flash drive from her bag and placed it on the table. "Here are all the records. Illegal transfers, shell companies, falsified contracts. The choice is simple. Either you admit the fraud now, or this goes straight to the press and to the authorities." Helena, the journalist who had been silently observing, raised her camera and said aloud, "I think we've already got today's headline." What followed was chaos. Investors shouted, directors stood up outraged, journalists rushed to capture every detail. Alvaro, cornered, tried to argue, but his words rang hollow. And Mariana, for the first time in years, felt free. The boss, who had humiliated her for so long, now stood defeated before everyone. Not by screams or violent revenge, but by the silent strength of someone who observed, planned, and waited for the right moment. In that instant, everyone understood. Power may build castles, but arrogance is always the first brick to crumble. The chaos still echoed through the room when Alvaro, red with rage and desperation, tried to regain control. With a nervous smile, he raised his hands and said, "This is nothing but a cheap act. Papers forged by a bitter secretary. Gentlemen, don't be fooled. I am still the owner of this company, and nothing will ever bring Haverstone down." But his voice no longer carried the same weight. The investors whispered among themselves, clearly shaken. Helena filmed everything, capturing every word. Gustavo, steady, placed the envelope of evidence on the table and stared directly at Alvaro. "Forged? Then explain your signature on every single one of these pages." The banker faltered. He tried to smile, but his mask was crumbling. That was when Mariana took a deep breath and played the card she had been holding until that moment. "This is not just financial fraud, gentlemen." Her voice rang clear through the room. Alvaro was responsible for an illegal deal that harmed thousands of families. He concealed the sale of poisoned land contaminated by chemical waste to make billions. And here, she said, raising another document, is the contract that proves it. A deathly silence fell over the room. Many of those present widened their eyes in horror. The revelation went far beyond numbers. It was a crime against human lives. Alvaro lost all color. For a moment, it seemed as if the air had left his body entirely. He tried to speak, but his voice came out shaky, unrecognizable. This can't be." Then one of the directors, who had been silent until then, stood up. With a heavy look, he pointed at Alvaro. I always knew something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this serious. If this comes to light, not only will Haverstone be destroyed, we'll all go down with you." The conference hall became a battlefield. Some shouted for Alvaro's immediate arrest, others scrambled to save themselves, while journalists rushed to broadcast the breaking news. Mariana, steady, remained standing at the center of the room. Her face, once overlooked and submissive, now reflected the calm of someone who had won. She didn't need to shout nor humiliate. She simply revealed the truth, and the truth spoke for itself. Alvaro, defeated, sank into his chair. His eyes, once full of arrogance, were now empty, as if the empire he had built had turned to dust before him. The police were called that very afternoon. When officers entered the room and snapped the handcuffs around the magnate's wrists, a murmur spread among everyone present. No one could believe that the man who once seemed untouchable was falling right there, in public, brought down by the courage of the secretary they had all ignored. As he was taken away, Alvaro tried one last provocation. "You may have won today, Mariana, but you will never be my equal." Mariana met his eyes with serenity and replied, "I never wanted to be like you." And those words were like the final nail in the coffin of his arrogance. The merger was canceled. The company collapsed, but the directors scrambled to salvage what was left. Helena published the report the same day, and the story spread across every newspaper and TV channel. But the greatest change was not in the headlines. It was inside Mariana herself. She realized she would never again need to bow before anyone to prove her worth. With the scandal splashed across every headline, the entire city began talking about the case. The banker who had once seemed untouchable was now behind bars, and Mariana, once invisible to all, emerged as a symbol of courage and quiet justice. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Journalists knocked at her door seeking interviews. Colleagues at the company now looked at her with respect, the same ones who used to ignore her in the hallway. But Mariana, true to her essence, rejected fame. She remained discreet, unwilling to be corrupted by the sudden glare of public attention. Helena, the journalist, became a close ally. Together, they turned the exposure into something bigger, uncovering other cases of corporate abuse hidden behind walls of luxury and silk ties. Yet Mariana wasn't looking for applause. What she wanted was to prove, to herself and to the world, that dignity and truth carry more power than any fortune. And she succeeded. Inside the company, drastic changes were made. Employees who had once been silenced now had a voice, and the culture of arrogance began to crumble. Many whispered that none of it would have been possible without the patience and intelligence of the secretary who, for years, had been dismissed as useless. But the greatest impact was human. As Mariana walked the streets, ordinary people smiled at her, thanking her for showing that one doesn't need to be a millionaire to have worth. Their grateful eyes were her true reward. While Alvaro withered away in courtrooms and negative headlines, Mariana was quietly writing her own victory. Not with loud vengeance, but with the serenity of someone who let the truth speak for itself. In the end, one lesson remained. Never underestimate someone because of their position or profession. What seems fragile may carry the strength to bring down empires. Mariana knew her life would never be the same again. Not because she sought recognition, but because by confronting the man who humiliated her, she discovered her own voice. And that voice would echo forever, not as a cry for revenge, but as a reminder that respect is never too much to give.